Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about something that we use continually here at Utah Youth Village. The class is called Observing and Describing Behavior. As we talked about social learning theory, you will notice that a lot of the things that we do have to do with behavior, shaping behavior, modifying behavior, encouraging positive behaviors, and minimizing negative behaviors. One of the puzzle pieces that we use in social learning theory to help us be really successful with that is observing and describing behavior. We're going to watch a short video that will show the foundational aspects of observing and describing, and then we'll come back and talk about those things as soon as we're done.
My name's Dave. I'm the father of 3 kids and I'm a school teacher. Observe and describe is a skill that is part of every skill we teach. Mastering observe and describe will make using the other skills on smarter parenting easier to learn and use. This skill is one of the core things parents can do to improve communication in your home and help parents interact with their children in a positive way. Another benefit of using observe and describe is that it avoids the question game where you might ask, "What are you doing?" and your child saying, "I don't know," and it goes on and on. This can help you move forward with correcting a negative behavior or reinforcing a positive behavior. The skill of observe and describe is simply observing a situation and then describing it. I know it sounds easy, but it can be tricky sometimes, especially if you're feeling frustrated or upset. The steps to observe and describe are: observe the behavior, get your child's attention, describe what you see. It's important to understand that children are concrete thinkers, and so describing what you observe is helpful for them to know what they are doing. Phrases like "that was good" and "that was bad" are vague, and most children don't understand what those really mean. Be descriptive and specific in what you observe. It gives your child a clearer understanding of expectations. What I do when I need to use the skill of observe and describe is I pretend I'm taking a mental picture of what I'm seeing, and then I describe what I see using an appropriate voice tone that fits the situation. Sound simple? Let's practice it together. We're going to watch a few examples, and you'll need to choose which statement best uses the steps of observe and describe. Did you choose "there's chocolate on your face"? If so, you're right. That was the correct choice. Let's try a situation that is a little more challenging. Let's say you walked into the kitchen and things looked like this. Did you choose "there's cereal all over the floor"? If so, that's the correct one. Let's try one with teenagers. Did you choose "I was talking to you" and you rolled your eyes? Yes, you will probably use this one a lot with your teenagers. We've been observing and describing behaviors using situations that are pretty common. But did you know that this skill is even more powerful when kids do something right? It is. Using this skill when your child does something well helps to reinforce that good behavior. Take, for example, this situation. See if you can pick the phrase that best observes and describes the positive behavior. Did you choose "you shared your Lego block by giving it to her"? If you did, you're right. Again, observe and describe is a very common skill that therapists and counselors use to help address behaviors, and it is something you can begin using right now too. When you use the skill, you are not judging your child, and it's a lot harder for them to argue what you've observed. The more practice observing and describing, the more you'll find you can remain calm in just about every situation that arises, because you're not reacting emotionally. You're choosing to address behaviors in a better way.
Welcome back. I hope that video gave you a good understanding of the foundational aspects of observing and describing behavior. It's also important to remember that observing and describing behavior doesn't happen alone. There are antecedents to behavior, and I think we've talked in a previous class about the ABCs of behavior. So there's the antecedent, the behavior, and then the consequence. And those work closely together with observing and describing behavior, because not only can we observe what we're actually observing, but we can also note for the child anything that might have come right before. So for example, if you note that your child is particularly grumpy after school, you can say to them, I notice that every time you come home from school, you throw your backpack down and you don't hang it on the peg in the hallway. This is a way to observe and describe not only the antecedent of the behavior, but also the behavior itself. And then C, of course, is the consequence, and that is sometimes a natural consequence, or it's a consequence that we will apply so that the child can learn either a reward, which is something that will reinforce that behavior so we can encourage it, or a response cost that will discourage that behavior. As we learned in the video, observing and describing is not a judgment of the behavior, but it is simply accurately describing what the behavior is that you observed. We don't want to apply any intent or motive or try to think about why they might be doing what they're doing. The only thing we're doing when we are observing and describing behavior is that. We are observing what we're seeing and we are describing it for the child. I don't know how many of us have ever lost our temper or said something thoughtlessly, but often what happens is that we're not taking the perspective of the other person. We're kind of in our own head and in our own skin, and having somebody verbally reflect back what we're doing can be really helpful in helping us to control any negative emotions or negative behaviors that we might be engaging in. And this applies to children of any age as well as adults. Oftentimes it really helps to take the perspective of the other person, and that's something that observing and describing really helps us do. So next we're going to talk about how we describe the circumstances surrounding the behavior. As I mentioned before, this is kind of where antecedents come into play. What was the child doing directly before? What general activities are they engaged in? When did it occur? Where did it occur? These are all really important pieces of data for you as the adult in the child's life so that you can problem solve with them the situations that create the behaviors that you're looking at. And this can actually apply to both positive behaviors and anything that you're trying to help them change. Again, going back to preceding behavior, we always want to look at that antecedent before we talk about any behavior that is happening or that we're observing. So the next thing we want to do is really watch their child's body language. Do they seem tense? Do they seem agitated? Do they seem sad? Youth often don't understand their own emotions, and describing what you're seeing can really help them pinpoint if they're doing something because they're sad or if they're doing something because they're hurt or angry. Oftentimes they don't know. But if you can describe for them if their shoulders are hunched or if their face is really red, things like that really help them kind of align their actions with what they're feeling at the time. It's also helpful to note the intensity of what they're doing. If you gave a minor correction, for example, and they become very agitated and start pacing or start yelling, you can explain to them that what they're doing doesn't exactly match the way that they are pacing and the way that their voice tone is raised. Again, always focusing on observing and describing instead of judging or commenting about why something might be happening. So why do we care about being specific and objective? Again, it makes them aware of specific behaviors that are either appropriate or inappropriate, or things that you want to see or things that you don't want to see. Also, it helps them learn what your tolerances are going to be. We will talk about tolerances in another class. Essentially what a tolerance is the behavior that you will either accept or not accept. And safety is really, really important to the youth in our care. They are not your children and they are not accustomed to your environment. And this is true even if they've been in your home for months. They have been raised in a completely different environment. Creating safety for them is one of the key goals that we have in being trauma sensitive to the child and their needs, in addition to it just honestly helps to improve their behavior, because if they feel safer, they are going to do better overall. Finally, it really helps strengthen your relationship with the child if you don't label what they're doing, but if you just describe what they're doing. When we're making behavioral descriptions, we do want to be as specific as possible. We also want to word it so that somebody could repeat it if they hadn't originally observed it. So for example, if I say somebody is pacing and using a loud voice tone, then another person would be able to describe that. If I say somebody appears agitated and frantic, although that might be more behaviorally specific than saying somebody is throwing a fit, it doesn't really describe what the person is doing. It takes some context for us to figure that out. So as often as we can, we just describe exactly what we're seeing. Also, we want to avoid judgmental terms such as bad attitude or poor posture. Again, this is in the eye of the beholder in many cases. If you think the way that you're sitting is fine and you don't equate bad posture to hunching your shoulders, then I don't know, if you tell me I have bad posture, what that really means. If you ask me to sit up straight in my chair, that gives me a better idea about what you'd like me to do. Also, if the child is using a loud or agitated voice tone, you can demonstrate that voice tone. One note with that is that it's really important not to demonstrate their voice tone in an angry or mocking fashion, because that can actually make the child more angry and make you less successful in trying to help them with their behavior. Also, describe their body language in the things that you're observing. For example, if a youth is tapping their hand on a table or if they're shuffling papers, you can describe those things that the child is involved in. Also, if they are using a really loud voice tone, you can say that you would like them to use a quieter voice tone, and then you can demonstrate that for them so that they will be more successful in imitating what you're asking them to do. So next, you're going to do an exercise where you complete an observing and describing worksheet, and then this will be submitted electronically to your consultant, and they will review how you did at the completion of your training. Okay, and our final exercise is called Making Descriptions Clear. In this exercise, you will read the sentence and then mark whether or not you feel that it's specific or it's vague. And again, this will be reviewed with you by your consultant at the end of your training. I want to thank you for joining me for observing and describing behavior, and I hope you're enjoying the training.